In this webinar, I will be talking about understanding event policies in BMC Helix Operation Management. My name is Saul Vergara, and I work for BMC Helix Operation Management Support Team. Please take a moment to read this notice, as we will be putting this on our social platforms. Now, I'm going to present you the agenda. Purpose of event policies. What is the idea for creating an event policy? Event policy types and execution order. What are the policy types and what would be the order for every single executed event? 3. Demo common use cases. We will explain common use cases of policies through a demo of them. 4th, best practices and troubleshooting. Here we recommend our best tips to work with policies and explain how to resolve most common issues. And lastly, references. Purpose of event policies. What is the purpose of this? Well, these policies can be useful to create complex workflows and performing specific activities automatically, like emailing events or adding information into event slots. Also, you can filter, enrich, correlate, or suppress events or information in it. All this can be done using specific timeframes, selection criteria, or using another policy. So, as you can see, these policies are a powerful tool to improve your monitoring and help your team to address issues faster. And for all the above said, we need to understand what type of policies we have in order to know how to apply. So, let's start with some basic concepts about these policies. Some of them, you can have an idea what they do with the name. But let's explain quickly each of them in this slide. Refinement. This policy allows you to update information in events. Basic enrichment. Refines slot events such as severity, priority, and message using selection criteria. Suppression. This type of policy drops events matching with selection criteria. Advanced enrichment. Similar to basic enrichment, but this one uses a wide range of slots and more complex workflows in which you can use selection criteria, function, and variables. At the end of this, you will get more meaningful events. Blackout helps you to black out specific events during a time frame, usually for maintenance activities. Dynamic enrichment. This is an advanced enrichment policy, but using external data like CSV files. Time-based. You use this policy to process an event in a time frame to a specific time duration, which means you can delay any activity like enrichment. Correlation. As per its name says, you can correlate and combine events in only one more meaningful event. Notification. This policy works for emailing or create incidents for operators or higher management about some events. As in previous slide mentioned, one important feature is execution order. In few words, all the new events must go through the same path of internal rules. So, as you may wonder, what is this path? Well, in this slide, you can see the 10 steps or phases that every single event should go through. For other side, we have old events. So, for existing events where a slot is updated, there are only two types of policy that will be executed. Advanced enrichment, When we have an advanced enrichment policy with the trigger if action configured, and notification. Notification by email only if the status, severity, or both slots are selected in the policy, and notification by incident. In BHOM 24.1.01, now we are able to see the event policy execution order preview for new and old events. So, as you can see in this screenshot, now you can see what policies are applied in your event. These are the most common and also confused use cases we will see in this webinar. Timeout policy. We will create a policy where OK events will be closed after some time. Notification policy. We will create a notification policy where email body contains a URL for direct link to the event. Advanced enrichment policy. We will see how to get an event policy to be triggered again. For example, trigger it if on a severity slot so that if event changes to critical severity, then change it back down to minor. Delay event policy. We will create a policy to delay an event being sent for incident generation. Now, let's see a timeout policy. This demo will show you how to create a policy where events are closed when the status is OK. We must consider two important things when a policy is created. Selection criteria should be precise and the proper use of policy configuration. But let's check it out in BHOM console. Once we are in BHOM console, we click in configuration drop-down menu and goes to event policy. Then click in create button in the upper right corner. It will show you a policy configuration form. So we will start naming our new policy. I suggest to use a descriptive name as a close OK events. Then briefly describe what policy does. In this case, we will type events are closed when status is OK. Next is precedence. That is the priority that the policy has. So the lower the number, the greater the importance. We keep this number. Then we have the most important part in this policy, event selection criteria, where we should pick the correct slots to validate what events will be taken. In this case, we are going to use slot host equals to this server. And severity, because we need to validate whether event is in OK status or not. Then, if we need to run this policy in a specific time, we should select the time frame. For this case, we select always active since we want to run it at all the time. Now, in the last part, in policy configuration, we are going to select time-based option because this policy helps us processing our event under a duration of time and enrich the status slot. Once we get the diagram page, we are going to proceed to set up the timeout settings. So we type close OK event after 1 minute in label. The duration for this example, we used 1 minute. So in unit, we will select minutes. So the idea is to close the event after 1 minute with the OK status. Then click apply. Then just right in the bottom half of the console, you will see a drop-down menu
that it says Add below. Click on it and select Enrich. It will create another component in your workflow, which is the enrichment procedure, where we are going to change the status slot to close. Type change status to close in label. Along with the status slot and the value which is closed. Then apply. Now save it, add a policy summary, enable the policy, and save it. Now you will see the new policy that you have created in the policy list. Now let's see an example in our environment. Let's recap about our policy. Will be only consider events that contains host equals to or host, CLM, AUS, BD4, LFD, and the severity OK. Once we get this event in our console, should be closed after 1 minute. So let's trigger the event test. Event has been triggered. Once the event has come in our console, as we can see, meets both criteria, host and severity. Now, event should be closed after 1 minute. A minute has now passed. Once closed, as we can see, and in order to see if our policy is the one that closed our event, we are going to click in 3 dots on our left hand on the event and click on View Event Details. Also, we can click directly on the occurred or modified value for the event. Then, we can go to Log and Notes tab, and in the bottom of this screen, we can see what policy has been applied to this event. In this case, our Close OK Events policy. Now, event is closed as per our policy. One of the most common scenarios is when you have created a notification policy to get an email with that important event, but you want to access directly to BHOM console to see that event. Well, in this demo, we will show you how to create it. Let's go to BHOM console. Once in BHOM console, in event policy configuration, we need to create a new policy as we saw in our previous demo. So, click in Create button. Now, we need to name it. For this policy, we will type notification policy with a direct link. Now, in description field, we will type notification policy with direct link to event in BHOM console. Precedence, we will leave it as it is. Now, in event selection criteria, we will select all the events with class equals to event, and in the message slot contains base 64. In time frame, we will use always active since we want to run permanently. And now, most important and interesting part of this policy, configuration. First, we need to convert our event ID to base64 format, which help us to keep data through transport layers. Second, populate with BHOM URL with event ID. And third, notification. So let's start creating an advanced enrichment policy type. Once we get the workflow, we will select variable since we are going to need to assign the ID to this variable. In label, type convert event ID to base64. In name, type the variable name. For this example, we will use base64 event ID. Now, in value, you will pick function up to use to base64 function, which is the one that helps us to convert it to base64. Now, click on select function. Let's look for function to base64. Once we get the form, we will feed it up text string. So we will type ID, which is the one that we want to convert. Then apply. Now, next step will be to create the enrichment part. For that, we need to go to drop-down menu that it says add below in the bottom half of the workflow. Click on it and select enrich. Once we get the enrich form, we will type in the label enrich message. Then, in the slot to enrich, we select detailed message. For value, select function because we are going to need a function called concat. Click on select the function, concat. Now, we will type in text string 1 the URL of our BHOM event page. And in text string 2, the variable that contains the ID but previously converted to base64. Click on apply, save it. Now we have configured the content of our email. So next step will be to create our notification policy. Now, in policy configuration, we need to select notification and configure email settings. In this case, in notification service, we use email since we want to receive this event information through email. There is another option related to incident, but we will see it later in other example. Now, we need to fill the recipient information, subject, and email's body previously configured. Recall, in message body, we should add the variable for the link in BHOM console. So, once we receive email, we are able to click on it and redirect to event details in BHOM console. Finally, you can select the notification criteria of the events to be sent. You can use severity and or status. For this example, we will use only severity equals to critical, which means that only critical events will be sent, no others. If we want to use the status, you need to select the respective checkbox and select what status you want to send. But in this example, we only use severity.
Also, you have another option, notification action. If you want to perform additional actions over that event, you can auto-assign or auto-acknowledge the event. No need for this example. Click on Save. Then, enable the policy to run immediately and save it. Type the policy summary and save it. Now, you have configured your new notification policy for event with a direct link to BHOM console.
Now, let's see an example of this kind of policy. As we recall from our policy, once we get the event in our console, we are going to convert our event in base64 format in order to get the link for our message body and then send the email. So let's trigger the event test. Once we get the event in our BHOM console, as we can see in our screen, in this case, we have configured a critical event for our host test, and message contains base64 string as we used in our selection criteria in the policy. Now, let's see our event details. As we can see, base64 is in the message slot, but now we can see in detailed message slot the full link to see the event directly. In Log and Notes tab, both policies are there. Advanced enrichment policy was the first one to perform, and the second one is the notification, as we declare in our policy. Now, we have got our email as per our notification policy. Let's check it out. As you can see, link is in the body of the message. So we can click on it directly and it should take us to event details. Clicking in the link, and now we are able to see the event details as per our policy. As we saw, policy has been performed by two internal policies, advanced enrichment and notification. Advanced enrichment policy demo. An advanced enrichment policy with a trigger if action is the few ones that can be applied to an old event. So, what we are going to check in this demo is when we perform a trigger if on a specific slot value to update an event, doing a trigger if on severity slot so that if event changes to critical severity, then change it back down to minor. Let's go to BHOM console. Once in BHOM console, we are going to create a policy with below information. Policy name, update severity. Description, we can type severity will be updated to minor if user change it to critical. Precedence, for this example, it's not relevant, so we leave it as it is. In event selection criteria, we will take only events that comes from our test server. Time frame won't be changed, so we'll leave it as always active. Now, in policy configuration, we are going to select advanced enrichment. Once we get the condition options for the workflow, we are going to select trigger if condition. This will send us our workflow with trigger if settings, which we need to fill them up. First, label. Let's make it simple. Let's type severity. Then, in trigger if the value changes for the slot,
we will pick severity up. Then mark the checkbox for trigger specific criteria and select in operator equals and slot value critical. Then apply. Will be recorded in our workflow. Now, we will add below a new action for enrichment, where severity will be changed to minor if it's greater than major. So in label, we will type severity change it back. In slot to enrich, we will use severity and value minor. Then apply. Save the policy configuration and type a summary for it. Now, save whole policy. Policy has been created successfully. Now, we need to enable it in order to start working with our events. Click on three dots in your right hand, then in Enable. Now, policy is enabled. But let's check our policy in action. We are going to send a test event using Postman. For this, we are going to use an event with critical severity, and we used a descriptive message to identify in our BHOM console. Also, our test code because it's our selection criteria for this policy. Then send it. As we can see in the response body, status code is 200 and status message is OK, which means it was sent successfully. Now, we should see this event in our BHOM console. And there it is. But something weird happened here, right? If we send critical severity, why it's showing up with severity minor? If we go to event details, we are going to see our event contains our message, severity minor as per our policy, and selection criteria matches with our host. Now, if we go to Log and Notes tab, we can see that there is a record that it says our policy was applied to this event. Now, what happens if we try to change severity for this event manually? Let's check it out. Click on the three dots. Select Modify Event. Then select Severity and put Critical on it. Then click in OK. As we can see, event slot modification was submitted, but severity remains in minor. Let's check the event details. Then Log and Notes. Now, as we can see, first record from the bottom says we sent an update over severity slot, but policy was applied again and keep the event in minor severity. So, as we were able to see in this demo, advanced enrichment policy with a trigger if condition is able to rerun several times over the same event.
Delay incident demo. In this demo, we will create a policy to delay the creation of the incident by using notification and time-based policy. Let's go our BHOM console to create and configure our policies. We're going to need some prerequisites for this: a custom slot to use it as a flag, and reconfigure a predefined policy for incidents, which is an out-of-the-box policy. Let's start creating our time-based policy. Go to Configuration, then Event Policies, and Create button. Now, we are going to configure our time-based policy. First, policy information. We named it as Create Incident with Delay. Description: create incident with 5 minutes delay.
And precedence. We are going to use one since importance is very high. Now, in event selection criteria, we are going to use three validations. First, class equal to IBRSD underscore event, because this is the class where we added the custom slot. Second, host equals to our test server. And third, severity, because we only want critical events for this demo. Now, in policy configuration, we are going to select time-based option and then timeout to delay our event. Now, we have our settings. So let's configure 5 minutes, then apply. Next step will be add below, and we'll select enrich in order to change our flag to yes after 5 minutes. So in settings, we will put in label create incident to yes. In slot to enrich, we will type our custom slot, create incident. And for the value, we will use text string and the string yes. Then apply. Now, we have configured our workflow for our time-based policy. Now, save it and type a summary for our policy. Now, save it again. Our policy has been created successfully. Now, second half of this demo is to reconfigure our predefined policy for incident. So, let's click on the three dots of the policy and edit it. We'll get the default configuration for the policy. So, what we need to configure is our selection criteria. So, let's remove them and use our own selection. Type class equals to IBRSD underscore event and host equals to our test server and our flag, create incident. Custom slot equals to yes. Now, let's check the policy configuration to make sure we are going to send incidents. Click on the small pencil in your right hand. It will show you notification service. Should be incident. Save it and save it again for whole policy. Now, notification policy has been updated. Now, let's enable them. Click on three dots for both policies and click on Enable. Now, both policies has been enabled. Let's test our policies. For this, we are going to use Postman. Once in Postman, we are going to configure our test event with below slots. Class equal to IBRSD underscore event, severity critical, host equals to our test server, and our custom slot. Create incident equals to no. Then send it. As we can see in our response, it has been successful. Status code is 200 and status message is OK. Let's see in BHOM console for events. Once an event in our BHOM, we are able to see the event in our console with our slot configured in Postman. Let's check event details. As we can see, class is equal to IBRSD underscore event, message, and severity. And if we go to the other tab, we're going to see our slot create incident equals to no. And if we go to log and notes tab, there are no records about any policy. So let's wait for 5 minutes to be updated as per our time-based policy. Now, The time has passed and modify slot has changed. Now it shows 12:40, which means that the event has been modified at that time. But let's check the event details. Click on that date, it will show you event details. Now click on Other tab, and now we can see our Create Incident slot with yes string. And if we go to Log and Notes tab, we will find that our policies now has been recorded at the bottom, which means our event has been sent for the incident to be created. As we can see in this demo, two policies were applied over the same event in order to be sent with 5 minutes delay.
Best practices. Well, best practices are as important as the result of this. So, the idea of this is when you create an event policy, keep in mind these important points. Use meaningful names and description and minimize the use of special characters on it. Use selective criteria and precise enrichment. Place conditions in lookup or policy selection criteria rather than after event fetch. Use simple patterns in criteria to avoid catastrophic backtracking. Be cautious when enrich the status slot. Review the complete use case. Third, be aware of slot limitation and dependencies. Be aware when the slot is updating dependent slot and when status changes. Avoid enriching string slots like message with lengthy values up to 5,000 characters. Limit entries in notes and operations slot up to 50 rows with 200 characters for each row. Be aware of policy migration and testing. Review MRLs during migration and migrate only proper data and MRLs. Test policy with simple data in non-prod environment before deployment. Verify function using in advanced enrichment policies by storing response in slots. Fifth, consider event precedence. Understand how event precedent works within an across policy configuration. Precedence works only for the same policy configuration. Configuration order is fixed across policies. Give meaningful names to variables in advanced enrichment policies. Avoid using special characters in variable names. Do not use reserved keys in variable names like new, old, DDE. Be cautious with lookup massively and trigger strategies. Continuous lookup on a massive event fetch may cause policy configuration skips. Use specific criteria in trigger if using to and from for slot updates. Once an event satisfies a timeout policy, it skips other timeout policies, avoiding unwanted events and notifications. Avoid creating out-of-the-box class type events for new aggregate events. Prevent frequent emails incidents by notification policy with a specific selection criteria. 9. Avoid using multiple policies that may execute for same events. This can cause a high consumption of resources, which means performance problems. Also, can be hard to understand. And 10th, avoid user extensive regex and try to have simple patterns. Sometimes when a regex is too much elaborated, it's hard to read and understand for future references. Troubleshooting event policies. In this slide, I provide some basic steps to check if any issue with event policies. Check log and note tab is a good practice when you know that some event should have been taken. Ensure that policy is not disabled. It's most common than you think. When you import an event policy, make sure that the JSON file structure is correct before importing the file. Blackout policies can affect event policies, blacking out whole events. Remember, timeframes when policy is applicable. There are some policies that we don't need to run permanently. An event policy not executed or not working as expected, it might be due to another event policy. Now, let's quickly wrap up and summarize what we covered in this webinar. We started with the purpose of event policies. They can be very helpful to be more productive and automate common tasks. Second, we talked through the type and execution order of event policies to understand them better. Next, I demonstrate a few event policies from creating to testing them with an event to see how they operate. And finally, I wrap up with some best practices and troubleshooting information to help you in case you encounter issues. I will leave you several references with more information on the subject. Thank you for your time and attention. Here are some links where you can find some useful information about event policies.